Stop trying to fix your life right now. Do you know the agony of fighting until exhaustion, only to realize that your current reality is an exact replay of last year? Why do some people seem to prosper effortlessly while you keep punching an invisible wall? Your problem is not a lack of effort. There is a ruthless physical law that you are violating at this very moment, and continuing to ignore this hidden mistake guarantees that you will repeat this same year forever. Take an honest look at your life. Different dates on the calendar, different headlines, different goals, but are the same emotions still running the show? The same worries, the same frustrations, the same fears disguised in new situations. Many people believe they are moving forward when they are actually walking in circles. The uncomfortable truth is that reality tends to repeat the patterns we refuse to see. You work harder, push harder, try harder, yet the results barely change because the source remains untouched. The outer world keeps presenting the same lesson in different forms. What if the life you're experiencing today is not being created by what is happening now, but by something much deeper? What if the reflection you see around you is only the delayed echo of who you have been? Once you understand the mirror principle, you may never look at your reality the same way again. Most of us were taught to solve problems by forcing things in the outer world to work out, but the mechanics behind the universe do not operate that way. There is a silent mistake draining all of your energy. Trying to change reality by acting only in the physical world is literally like trying to comb your hair by scratching the bathroom mirror. It is exhausting, useless, and there is a dangerous reason why continuing to insist on it will sink your results even deeper. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe that every problem must be attacked directly. If money is tight, work harder. If a relationship is struggling, push more. If opportunities are not appearing, chase them more aggressively. The entire system around us teaches action, pressure, and control. And while action certainly has its place, most people never stop to ask a deeper question. What if the visible circumstances of your life are not the source of the problem at all? Imagine standing in front of a mirror with a frown on your face. It would seem absurd to reach toward the reflection and try to force the image to smile. Yet this is exactly how many people live every day. They wake up frustrated by what they see in their bank account, in their relationships, in their careers, and they spend enormous amounts of energy trying to manipulate the reflection without ever looking at the face creating it. The tragedy is not just that it fails. The tragedy is that the failure creates even more frustration. When reality refuses to cooperate, people often conclude that they need to push harder. They double their effort. They increase their struggle. They become more obsessed with outcomes. And without realizing it, they strengthen the very emotional patterns that produce the unwanted results in the first place. This is where the mirror principle becomes impossible to ignore. The outer world is not simply a collection of random events happening to you. It acts more like feedback. It reveals patterns that already exist beneath the surface of your awareness. The conditions you encounter repeatedly are often reflections of emotional habits, expectations, assumptions, and reactions that have become so familiar that you no longer notice them. Think about the person who constantly encounters conflict wherever they go. Different workplaces, different friendships, different relationships, yet somehow the same drama appears again and again. On the surface, it looks like bad luck. But if the reflection never changes, there comes a point where we must question the source. The same is true with scarcity, disappointment, self-doubt, and even chronic frustration. Many people spend years trying to repair the image while completely overlooking the projector creating it. What makes this especially dangerous is that the physical world has a hypnotic effect on attention. It feels so real, so immediate, and so urgent that it convinces you to react to it constantly. Every bill demands attention. Every setback demands attention. Every delay demands attention. Soon your entire emotional life becomes a response to external conditions. And when that happens, you unknowingly surrender your creative power. Because whatever dominates your emotional state tends to become the lens through which you experience reality. If your attention is trapped in fear, you begin noticing more reasons to be afraid. If your attention is trapped in lack, you become highly sensitive to every sign that something is missing. The reflection appears to confirm your beliefs, and your beliefs become stronger because of the reflection. The cycle feeds itself. This is why so many people feel exhausted, despite working relentlessly. They are trying to move the image instead of moving themselves. They are fighting symptoms while ignoring causes. They are staring at the mirror, demanding change, while the source remains untouched. The most powerful shift begins when you stop treating external circumstances as commands that dictate how you must feel. Instead, you begin observing them as information, feedback, clues, indicators pointing towards something deeper occurring within your own consciousness. That does not mean blaming yourself for every challenge. It means reclaiming responsibility for the inner patterns that shape your experience. There is a profound difference between those two things. The moment you understand this, a strange sense of freedom starts to emerge. You no longer need to win every battle in the outer world before allowing yourself to feel peace. You no longer need every condition to become perfect before your life can change direction. But there is something else most people fail to understand. Even when they finally begin adjusting their inner state, they often expect reality to transform immediately. When the outer world does not instantly reflect the change, doubt rushes in. They assume nothing is happening. They abandon the process and return to old reactions. What they do not realize is that the mirror has a delay built into it, and that delay is where countless transformations are lost before they ever have the chance to appear. What most people completely ignore is that matter has a deep density, which creates a natural delay. The stagnant life you are facing today is not your true present moment. It is merely the crystallized echo of emotions you carried months ago. When you begin changing internally and do not immediately see results on the outside, you commit the most lethal mistake of all. You panic and abandon the process a millisecond before physical reality starts bending. This is one of the hardest truths for the human mind to accept. We live in a world that rewards immediate feedback. Press a button and a screen lights up. Send a message and receive a reply within seconds. Place an order and track its progress in real time. We have become conditioned to expect visible proof almost instantly, so when it comes to transforming our lives, we unknowingly bring that same expectation with us. The problem is that reality does not always operate at the speed of our desires. Imagine planting a seed in fertile soil. The moment it disappears beneath the ground, the process has already begun. Something is happening, changes are occurring, yet if you dig the seed up every morning to check its progress, you interrupt the very growth you are hoping to see. Many people do exactly this with their inner transformation. They make a genuine shift in their thinking. They begin releasing old emotional patterns. They start responding differently to challenges. For a few days or a few weeks, they feel lighter, calmer, and more aligned. But then they look around and discover that the bank account still looks the same. The relationship still feels uncertain. The opportunities have not appeared yet. Fear immediately starts whispering. Nothing is working. You were fooling yourself. Go back to the way you used to think. And because the external world seems more convincing than the internal one, they surrender to the old pattern. They react exactly as they did before. They feed the same emotional state they were trying to leave behind. What they fail to recognize is that the physical conditions surrounding them may simply be old momentum playing itself out. Think of a large ship crossing the ocean. If the captain turns the wheel, the direction changes immediately, but the vessel itself does not instantly swing into its new course. Because of its size and momentum, there is a period where the old trajectory still appears to be active. Your life often behaves the same way. The moment your internal state changes, a new direction is established. But the visible circumstances may continue displaying evidence of the previous direction for a while. This delay creates a critical test. Can you remain committed to the new state before receiving external confirmation? This is where most transformations either survive or collapse. The mirror principle teaches that reality reflects consciousness, but many people misunderstand what that means. They expect the reflection to change the instant they change. They forget that every reflection depends on the medium carrying the image. And physical reality, by its very nature, moves more slowly than thought, emotion, and perception. The danger is not the delay itself. The danger is the interpretation of the delay. When people encounter a gap between inner change and outer evidence, they often interpret that gap as failure. In reality, the gap may be proof that the process is unfolding exactly as it should. Consider how many times you've started moving towards something new, only to become discouraged because the old reality kept showing up. Maybe you committed to thinking differently about money, yet unexpected expenses appeared. Maybe you chose to approach relationships with more confidence, yet old misunderstandings resurfaced. Maybe you decided to trust life more deeply, and suddenly circumstances seemed even more chaotic. At first glance, these events look like signs that nothing is changing. But what if they are simply the final echoes of a state you are no longer feeding? What if the old reality is appearing one last time because it has not yet received the message that the source has changed? This perspective changes everything. Instead of treating unwanted circumstances as evidence against your progress, you begin seeing them as delayed reflections of a previous chapter. You stop negotiating with every temporary appearance. You stop allowing yesterday's momentum to dictate today's identity. And something remarkable happens when you develop this patience. Your emotional dependence on immediate results begins to weaken. You become less reactive, less desperate, less controlled by appearances. You stop asking, "Why hasn't it happened yet?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming while it unfolds?" That subtle shift creates stability, and stability creates consistency. And consistency is what allows a new reality to finally gain enough momentum to emerge. But there is another challenge waiting at this stage, and it catches people by surprise. As the delay continues, pressure begins to build. Small problems seem larger, minor setbacks feel more threatening. The mind starts searching for danger, and if fear becomes the dominant response, the pressure that could have been neutralized starts multiplying, setting the stage for a much deeper spiral than most people ever expect. This is exactly where a simple discomfort transforms into an uncontrollable avalanche. If you look at your current crisis and emit fear or distress, the universe does not understand your request for help. It only reads the signature of scarcity. The mirror absorbs that signal and returns chaos to you multiplied. A forgotten bill becomes a massive debt. A minor disagreement becomes a painful rupture. Life starts squeezing the air out of your lungs. But there is an invisible flaw in this matrix that you can use to your advantage. Most people believe their suffering comes from the event itself. They point to the bill, the argument, the rejection, the delay, or the unexpected problem, and conclude that these circumstances are the source of their emotional pain. But if you observe carefully, something deeper is happening. Two people can face nearly identical challenges and experience completely different outcomes. One person encounters a setback and immediately spirals into anxiety. Their mind races into worst-case scenarios. They imagine future disasters. Every small obstacle becomes evidence that life is working against them. Within days, their energy drops, their decisions become reactive, and they begin creating even more complications for themselves. The other person faces the same challenge, but remains emotionally steady. They acknowledge the problem without becoming consumed by it. They take action where action is possible and release what cannot be controlled. Because their perception remains clear, they often discover solutions that were invisible to the person trapped in fear. The difference is not the event. The difference is the state from which the event is interpreted. This is where pressure begins its silent expansion. A challenge arrives in your life. On its own, it may be manageable, but when fear enters the picture, the mind starts feeding the challenge with attention, emotion, and significance. The problem grows larger in your imagination than it is in reality. You revisit it repeatedly. You discuss it constantly. You rehearse possible failures. You carry it into every conversation and every quiet moment. Without realizing it, you are supplying energy to the very thing you want to eliminate. The mirror principle suggests that reality reflects not only what you focus on, but also the emotional charge attached to that focus. This is why pressure often appears to accelerate once fear becomes dominant. The external world begins mirroring the internal state more clearly. When you expect conflict, you become more sensitive to signs of conflict. When you expect loss, you become more alert to signs of loss. When you expect rejection, you begin interpreting neutral situations through the lens of rejection. Suddenly, life feels heavier, not because reality changed overnight, but because your relationship with reality changed. Think about a microphone placed too close to a speaker. At first, there is only a faint sound. Then the sound feeds back into itself. The volume increases. The frequency intensifies. Within seconds, an unbearable screech fills the room. Fear often operates in exactly the same way. A small concern enters the mind. The concern generates emotional tension. The tension increases focus on the concern. The increased focus generates even more tension. The cycle feeds itself until a manageable problem feels overwhelming. This is why many people look back on difficult periods of their lives and realize that the emotional suffering was often far greater than the actual event. The pressure became amplified by the constant feedback loop between attention and fear. But hidden inside this process is something powerful. The system contains a weakness. The feedback loop depends on participation. It requires your continued emotional investment to sustain itself. That realization changes everything. Because the moment you begin observing your fear instead of becoming it, a small gap appears. That gap may seem insignificant at first, but it interrupts the cycle. Instead of reacting automatically, you start noticing the mechanics of the reaction itself. You see the mind creating stories. You see the body responding with tension. You see old patterns attempting to pull you into familiar emotional territory. And for the first time, you recognize that awareness itself is different from the fear being observed. This is where many people expect a dramatic breakthrough. They imagine that once they understand these principles, fear will disappear completely. But reality is rarely that simple. In fact, something unexpected often happens. As pressure increases, people become desperate to escape it. They search for techniques, affirmations, and motivational messages that promise immediate relief. They try to replace every negative thought with a positive one. They force themselves to appear optimistic, even when anxiety is still boiling beneath the surface. At first, this seems like progress. It feels better than fear. It feels more empowering. But beneath the surface, a new trap is quietly forming, one that prevents genuine transformation because it teaches people to cover their inner state instead of honestly facing it. And that hidden tension eventually creates problems of its own, no matter how positive the words may sound. In an attempt to escape the pressure, many people fall into the trap of forced positive thinking. But here is a bitter truth. Repeating affirmations of abundance while your chest burns with anxiety is like spraying expensive perfume over a garbage can. The quantum mirror completely ignores your vocabulary and reflects the fire of your inner fear. If you keep masking your desperation, your next year may become an even worse nightmare. A radical break is necessary. This is one of the most misunderstood traps on the path of personal transformation. When people realize that fear, worry, and emotional tension are affecting their experience, they often swing to the opposite extreme. They begin policing every thought. They become afraid of feeling afraid. They treat negative emotions as enemies that must be defeated immediately. At first, this seems reasonable. After all, if fear creates more pressure, then positive thinking should create positive results, right? But real life reveals a different story. You have probably met people who speak endlessly about abundance while secretly living in constant financial stress. People who talk about peace while carrying tension in every muscle of their body. People who repeat uplifting phrases every day, but remain trapped in the same emotional cycles year after year. The problem is not that positive thoughts are bad. The problem is that many people use them as emotional camouflage. They are not trying to transform their inner state. They are trying to hide it. And reality responds to what is genuine, not to what is performed. Imagine standing in front of a cracked foundation in your home. Instead of repairing the structure, you decide to paint the walls with brighter colors. For a short time, everything looks better. Visitors may even compliment the appearance. But beneath the surface, the damage continues spreading. Sooner or later, the foundation demands attention. The same principle applies internally. If anxiety is present, pretending it is not there does not dissolve it. If fear is present, denying it does not remove it. If desperation is present, covering it with inspirational language does not transform its energy. In many cases, suppression actually strengthens what you are trying to escape. This is why some people become exhausted after years of chasing positivity. They are carrying two burdens instead of one. First, they carry the original fear. Then they carry the effort required to constantly conceal that fear from themselves and others. The result is emotional fatigue. The mind becomes divided. One part is experiencing discomfort. The other part is pretending everything is fine. That internal conflict creates tension, and tension quietly shapes perception. The mirror principle points towards something far more honest than forced optimism. It suggests that transformation begins with awareness, not performance. The mirror does not ask you to act positive. It reflects the state you are actually occupying. That can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the possibility of self-deception. Many people would rather repeat a comforting phrase than sit quietly with the truth of what they are feeling. But the truth, when observed without resistance, contains information. Fear reveals attachment. Anxiety reveals uncertainty. Frustration reveals expectations that reality is not currently meeting. These emotions are not punishments. They are signals. The problem begins when we either become trapped inside them or try to bury them beneath layers of artificial positivity. Neither approach creates freedom. One creates identification. The other creates denial. What is needed is something different, something simpler. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" a more powerful question is, "Can I allow myself to see this clearly without becoming consumed by it?" That question changes the entire dynamic, because awareness creates space, and within that space, emotions lose much of their ability to control your behavior. You stop fighting fear, you stop feeding fear, you simply observe it. Strangely, this is where genuine change often begins. Not when you force yourself into positivity, not when you convince yourself everything is perfect, but when you become willing to face what is actually present without adding resistance on top of it. This requires courage because the mind is addicted to control. It constantly searches for techniques that promise immediate certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants proof that everything will work out. Yet the deeper transformation occurs when you no longer need to manipulate every emotional experience. You learn to remain present with uncertainty. You learn to stop running from discomfort. And as that happens, something unexpected emerges. The emotional charge that once fueled your fear begins to weaken naturally, not because you fought it, not because you covered it, but because you stopped feeding it with resistance. This is the radical break that so many people miss. The goal is not to become a master of positive thinking. The goal is to become free from emotional dependence on any particular circumstance. And that freedom introduces a paradox that the logical mind struggles to understand at first. The very thing you have spent years trying to control may begin changing only after you stop fighting with it. The reality you desperately wanted to fix may start loosening its grip when you finally release the need to force an outcome. What appears to be surrender from the outside is often the beginning of a completely different kind of power. The real turning point will shatter everything common sense has taught you. The only way to change the chaos in front of you is not by fighting it, but by removing its importance. Resistance acts like superglue. The more you hate your current situation, the more firmly you anchor it in your life. The exact second you look at the problem that haunts you and simply refuse to react emotionally to it, you unplug the energy source that has been keeping it alive. At first, this idea sounds almost offensive. Most people have spent their entire lives believing that intense effort, constant concern, and emotional involvement are signs of responsibility. If something matters, you worry about it. If a problem appears, you wrestle with it. If life becomes difficult, you fight harder. That approach feels natural. It feels productive. It feels like the only reasonable response. But if you look closely at the challenges that have remained stuck in your life for years, a strange pattern often appears. The problems that consume the most emotional energy are frequently the same problems that refuse to leave. The reason is simple. Whatever occupies the center of your emotional world gains influence over your attention, and whatever dominates your attention begins shaping your experience. Think about holding a rope during a tug of war. As long as both sides keep pulling, the struggle continues. It may shift slightly in one direction or the other, but the conflict remains alive because both participants are supplying energy. Now imagine that one side simply lets go. The entire dynamic changes instantly. This is the essence of surrender. Not surrender as defeat, not surrender as giving up, not surrender as becoming passive. True surrender means refusing to continue the emotional struggle with what already exists. It means seeing reality clearly without entering into battle with it. Many people misunderstand this because they associate non-resistance with weakness. In reality, resistance is often the weaker position. Resistance places your emotional state under the control of circumstances. It turns external conditions into the authority that determines whether you can experience peace. Surrender reverses that relationship. Instead of demanding that reality change before you can feel better, you reclaim the ability to remain centered regardless of what is happening around you. That is not weakness, that is freedom. The mirror principle becomes especially important here because the mirror responds differently when emotional attachment begins to dissolve. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack for so many years that you forget it is there. Every movement feels difficult. Every hill feels steeper than it should. You assume life itself is exhausting. Then one day, the backpack comes off. The world has not changed. The hill is still the hill, the path is still the path, but your relationship with the journey is completely different. This is what happens when emotional resistance begins to fade. The situation may still exist for a period of time. The bill may still need to be paid. The conversation may still need to happen. The uncertainty may still be present. Yet the emotional weight attached to those circumstances starts disappearing. And that changes your decisions. A fearful mind reacts. A surrendered mind responds. A fearful mind narrows its vision. A surrendered mind sees possibilities. A fearful mind searches desperately for immediate escape. A surrendered mind remains clear enough to recognize opportunities. This is why some of the greatest breakthroughs occur immediately after people stop chasing them, not because the universe rewards indifference, but because attachment had been creating interference. The desperation itself was distorting perception. When the emotional struggle ends, clarity returns. You stop forcing, you stop obsessing, you stop measuring every hour for signs of progress, and ironically, that is often when movement begins. Have you ever noticed how solutions frequently appear when you stop staring at the problem? You wrestle with an issue for days, becoming increasingly frustrated. Then you take a walk, focus on something else, or simply release the need to solve it immediately. Suddenly, the answer emerges naturally. The answer was not absent before. Your tension was preventing you from seeing it. Life often operates in a similar way. The more tightly you grip a desired outcome, the more pressure you create around it. The more pressure you create, the less clearly you think. The less clearly you think, the more difficult it becomes to recognize the paths already available. Surrender breaks this cycle. It removes the emotional static. It creates space. And within that space, something remarkable starts to happen. You no longer feel compelled to wait for external evidence before allowing yourself to experience relief. You begin generating that relief internally. You stop treating peace as a reward that arrives after success and start treating it as a state available now. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because once emotional dependence loosens its grip, you become capable of embodying a new reality before there is any physical proof to support it. And that is where one of the most important laws behind the mirror principle begins to reveal itself. The reflection can only follow the image that appears first. The effect cannot lead the cause. Yet most people spend their lives waiting for evidence before they allow themselves to become the person they want to be, never realizing that the order itself may be exactly backward. Think about it this way. A mirror has no will of its own. It will never smile at you first. To alter the image, the law requires that you move first. You must have the courage to inhabit the relief, certainty, and peace of your new reality today, right now, before there is a single extra dollar in your bank account to prove it. This break from predictability creates a direct short circuit in the laws of space and time surrounding you. This is where many people hesitate. The idea sounds simple when you hear it, but living it is another matter entirely. Most of us have been trained to let circumstances determine our emotional state. If good news arrives, we feel relieved. If money appears, we feel secure. If the relationship improves, we feel loved. If success comes, we feel confident. In other words, We wait for the effect before allowing ourselves to experience the feeling. But what if this habit is the very thing keeping the cycle alive? What if waiting for the reflection to change before changing your inner state is like standing in front of a mirror and demanding that the image move first? The logic of the world says that feelings should follow evidence. The logic behind the mirror principle suggests something very different. It suggests that the emotional state you consistently occupy becomes part of the cause itself. This does not mean pretending. It does not mean acting as if problems do not exist. It means refusing to let current conditions dictate your identity. There is a profound difference between those two approaches. Imagine two people facing the same financial challenge. One person wakes up every day feeling trapped. Their thoughts revolve around lack. Their attention remains fixed on what is missing. Every decision is filtered through fear and urgency. The other person may have the exact same numbers in the bank account, but they consciously cultivate a different state. They practice stability. They make decisions from clarity rather than panic. They refuse to define themselves by temporary circumstances. Externally, their situations may appear similar. Internally, they are living in completely different worlds, and over time, those inner worlds begin producing different results. Why? Because emotional states influence perception, behavior, and choices in ways that are often invisible. A mind filled with scarcity notices limitations. A mind grounded in possibility notices openings. A mind trapped in fear becomes defensive. A mind rooted in confidence becomes creative. The external outcomes eventually diverge because the internal causes were different from the beginning. This is why embodying a new state before external evidence appears is not an act of fantasy. It is an act of alignment. You are no longer waiting for life to grant you permission to become a different version of yourself. You are choosing that version now. Think about how often people postpone peace. I'll relax when the debt is gone. I'll feel secure when I earn more. I'll be happy when everything works out. The problem with this approach is that it places your emotional well-being permanently in the future. The destination keeps moving. One goal is reached and another condition appears. One problem is solved and a new concern emerges. The mind remains trapped in a constant state of waiting, but life unfolds only in the present moment. The state you occupy now is the state from which your next decisions will emerge. That is why this principle matters so deeply. The cause always comes before the effect. The frequency comes before the reflection. The identity comes before the evidence. The challenge is that your old reality will continue presenting arguments against this idea. You may choose peace today and still receive an unexpected bill tomorrow. You may choose confidence today and still encounter rejection next week. You may choose trust today and still experience delays. When this happens, the mind immediately wants to return to its old conclusion. See? Nothing changed. But that reaction misses the entire point. The purpose is not to manipulate reality into obeying your timeline. The purpose is to become internally consistent regardless of temporary appearances. Because consistency is what generates momentum. A single moment of confidence changes very little. A sustained state of confidence changes everything. A single moment of peace is comforting. A sustained state of peace begins altering how you move through life. This is where transformation becomes practical rather than theoretical. You stop asking whether the new state is working. You start asking whether you are willing to remain loyal to it. Can you choose relief even while uncertainty remains? Can you choose trust while the outcome is still unknown? Can you choose stability before receiving proof? Those questions reveal whether you are operating from cause or effect, and this is where the real test begins. Because the old reality rarely disappears immediately, it often continues displaying familiar problems, familiar triggers, and familiar invitations to react. The past will keep knocking at the door, trying to convince you that nothing has changed. The challenge is not creating a new state for a few moments. The challenge is protecting that state when the outer world becomes loud enough to tempt you back into old patterns. This is your trial by fire. The outer world will continue flashing old problems across your screen in an attempt to steal your peace and pull you back into old patterns. But if you walk, breathe, and maintain this new protected state, bringing relief back into your chest every time doubt appears. The umbilical cord connecting you to your past is cut. Without your anxiety to feed on, the old reality begins to weaken rapidly. This is the stage that separates temporary inspiration from real transformation. Almost anyone can feel empowered for a few hours after hearing a new idea. Many people can maintain a new perspective for a day or two. But the real challenge begins when life stops being supportive and starts testing the stability of your new state. The phone call arrives, the unexpected expense appears, the old conflict resurfaces, the delay continues longer than you hoped. Suddenly, the peace you felt becomes difficult to maintain. This is the moment when most people unknowingly return to the very patterns they were trying to leave behind. Not because they failed, not because the principle is wrong, but because they mistake the appearance of old conditions for evidence that nothing is changing. The outer world has momentum. As we explored earlier, it reflects previous states long after those states have begun to change internally. Because of that delay, old circumstances often continue appearing for a period of time. The question is not whether those circumstances will show up. The question is whether they can still control you. This is where the mirror principle reveals one of its deepest lessons. Your power does not come from controlling what appears. Your power comes from choosing how you relate to what appears. That distinction changes everything. Many people spend years trying to eliminate uncertainty from their lives. They believe peace will finally arrive once all problems are solved. Yet problems are a natural part of being human. New challenges will always emerge. If your emotional stability depends on a perfect environment, then stability will always remain fragile. True stability is something different. It is the ability to remain connected to yourself while uncertainty exists. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. Most people become obsessed with stopping the wind. They fight the rain. They argue with the clouds. They exhaust themselves trying to control conditions that are beyond their reach. But a person who understands the deeper principle focuses on something else. They learn how to stand. The storm may continue for a while, but their relationship to the storm changes completely. This is exactly what happens when you hold a new state in the middle of old circumstances. The fear may still appear. The doubts may still visit. The old thoughts may still knock on the door. But instead of inviting them in and allowing them to take control, you simply notice them. You let them pass through. You return your attention to the state you have chosen, again and again. At first, this can feel repetitive. Sometimes it feels as though nothing is happening. Yet, beneath the surface, something significant is taking place. Every time you refuse to feed an old reaction, you weaken its influence. Every time you choose calm over panic, you interrupt a familiar pattern. Every time you return to relief instead of fear, you strengthen a different pathway within yourself. The process is subtle but powerful. Think of a path through a forest. The more frequently it is used, the clearer it becomes. The ground becomes firm. The direction becomes obvious. But when a path is abandoned, nature slowly reclaims it. The same thing happens internally. Old emotional patterns survive through repetition. When you stop walking those paths, they begin losing strength. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A dramatic emotional breakthrough may feel exciting, but lasting change is usually built through quiet moments of choice, a moment when fear appears and you choose not to follow it, a moment when uncertainty appears and you choose not to worship it, a moment when doubt appears and you return to trust instead. These moments rarely look impressive from the outside, yet they are often the moments that reshape an entire life. The challenge is that your old reality will continue trying to convince you otherwise. It will present evidence. It will present delays. It will present familiar circumstances and ask the same question over and over again. Are you sure you want to remain this person? Many people answer that question with their reactions. They return to anxiety. They return to desperation. They return to the emotional habits that created the previous cycle. But when you answer with consistency, something begins to happen that feels almost unbelievable. The old reality starts losing its grip. Situations that once triggered intense emotional responses begin feeling neutral. Problems that once dominated your thoughts begin fading into the background. You stop carrying yesterday into every new moment. And when enough of that emotional momentum dissolves, The structure that supported the old version of your life starts becoming unstable. The familiar patterns no longer receive the energy they once depended on. What seemed permanent begins to crack. What seemed fixed begins to shift. And that is often the first sign that the old reality is approaching the point where it can no longer sustain itself. When you reach this level of unshakable mastery, the impossible begins to happen with startling speed. The solid structure of your problems collapses completely. Opportunities that remained locked for years open by themselves. Key people appear out of nowhere. Abundance flows without friction. The physics of the universe has no choice but to reorganize the atoms of your life so that the outer world perfectly mirrors who you have become within. At least, that is how it feels from the inside. What often looks like a miracle is actually the result of a process that has been unfolding for much longer than most people realize. For months, perhaps even years, a person may have been trapped inside the same emotional patterns, the same fears, the same reactions, the same expectations. Because those patterns remained unchanged, their choices remained similar. Their attention remained fixed on the same limitations. Their behavior followed familiar routes. Then something shifts. Not overnight, not because of a lucky break, but because they stop feeding the old version of themselves. They stop rehearsing the same fears. They stop building their identity around old wounds. They stop treating temporary circumstances as permanent truths. And gradually, a different way of moving through life emerges. From the outside, the change may seem subtle at first, but eventually a threshold is crossed. The opportunities that were always present but previously overlooked suddenly become visible. Conversations begin leading in new directions. Decisions become clearer. Energy that was once wasted on worry becomes available for action. And because the person is no longer reacting from the same emotional conditioning, life begins producing different outcomes. This is why the collapse of an old reality can appear surprisingly fast. People often focus on the visible moment when everything changes, but they ignore the invisible preparation that made that moment possible. Think about an iceberg. For a long time, the structure appears solid and permanent. Then one day, a massive section breaks away. To an observer, the event seems sudden. In reality, countless shifts had been occurring beneath the surface long before the visible break happened. The same is true in human experience. A relationship may transform after years of tension. A new opportunity may arrive after months of uncertainty. A solution may emerge after a long period of confusion. To the outside world, it appears abrupt. But internally, the foundation had already been changing. This is one of the deepest insights behind the mirror principle. Reality often reorganizes itself gradually before it reveals that reorganization visibly. And when the results finally appear, people are tempted to believe that the external event was the cause of their new state. They say, "Now I can relax because things worked out." But that interpretation misses the deeper lesson. The reason things worked out differently is often because the state changed first. The person became less reactive, less attached, less controlled by fear, more present, more stable, more capable of recognizing possibilities. The outer shift followed the inner one. This does not mean every challenge instantly disappears. It does not mean life becomes a perfect sequence of victories. Human life will always contain uncertainty. There will still be unexpected events. There will still be moments that test your patience. There will still be situations that require courage. The difference is that those situations no longer define you. The old reality depended on your participation. It depended on automatic reactions. It depended on emotional habits that repeated themselves day after day. Once those habits lose their grip, the structure supporting the old experience becomes weaker, and eventually it can no longer sustain itself. What once felt permanent begins to feel temporary. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. What once felt impossible begins to feel natural. Many people spend years waiting for life to give them evidence before they trust themselves. Yet the people who create the most meaningful changes often move in the opposite direction. They learn to trust the process before all the evidence arrives. They remain committed during the delay. They remain steady during uncertainty. They refuse to let appearances dictate their identity. and over time that consistency produces results that their former self would have considered unlikely. The fascinating part is that when the old reality finally collapses, there is often less excitement than expected. Not because the transformation is insignificant, but because the person has already changed. The external world is simply catching up to what they have been practicing internally. The victory feels familiar, the peace feels natural, the opportunity feels deserved. The new reality no longer feels like something extraordinary happening to them. It feels like a reflection of who they have become. And that may be the greatest sign that the cycle has truly been broken. When you no longer need to force, chase, or fight for proof, your attention shifts away from the old story entirely. You begin seeing that the repeated year was never sustained by the calendar, the economy, other people, or even circumstances alone. It was sustained by a pattern. And once that pattern dissolves, a completely different question begins to emerge. One that changes the way you look at every year that follows. Our calendar hanging on a wall does not have the power to change your story. Remember the absolute rule, the mirror principle. Ignore this law and you will repeat the same year forever. Your true new year does not begin when January arrives. It begins in the millisecond you decide to turn your back on the illusion outside and take your seat at the projector that exists within you. The cycle of suffering is over. The only question left today is this: what reflection will you have the courage to sustain from this moment forward? The year ahead will not be shaped by wishes, resolutions, or promises made in moments of emotion. It will be shaped by the state you return to every day when life tests you. The outer world may take time to catch up, but never forget that every lasting change begins at the source, not in the reflection. If you stayed until this moment, write this phrase in the comments: I choose the cause, not the reflection. That will let me know you made it all the way to the end and that you are ready to break the cycle of the repeated year. If this message spoke to you, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen now. It will help you go even deeper into these ideas and continue this journey of inner transformation. And if you would like to support the channel and help us create more content like this, consider becoming a member. Exclusive content will be coming soon for members. Until next time, protect your state, trust the process, and remember, the reflection always follows who you become.